few more seats up front here. As soon as everybody gets a seat, we'll go ahead and get started. Few more seats up front. I know I'm Catholic. I like to sit in the back as well. Don't like the front row. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon. My name is Josh Burns. I'm with the Iowa Utilities Board. Thank you for having us in Manchester today. Did spend a little time here back in my college days when my best friends was a Soppy. So spent some time with the Soppy family. I don't know if I should mention it or not, but I'm also from Osage, and I know that West Delaware and Osage are somewhat of a rival when it comes to wrestling. So nothing like good competition. So I appreciate that. A few things here today to point out, just logistically, some things that I have to go through. Restrooms are over here to my left. I did find out that in case we had inclement weather, we needed to seek some sort of shelter, we would go over here, and there's kind of a corridor behind me. They said that's where they suggest people would go. Fire, obviously, would just go ahead and use the emergency exits. I would ask people at this time if you could silence your cell phones, or if you do need to take a phone call, if you could step out of the room and take that phone call. I can tell you from experience of doing many of these meetings, it does make it difficult for everybody in the audience to hear if you have sidebar conversations going on or if somebody else is on the cell phone. So just out of respect of everybody in the room, we want everybody to hear everything that is said today. And so if you can silence the cell phones or have those conversations outside of here, it's just respectful for everybody else that's trying to hear the information. We will go through and as the IUB, I will do our presentation on what we're required to provide you with information today. And then following that, the company will go through their presentation that they're required to provide you. And then beyond that, we will have a question and answer period. So I would just ask that everybody holds their questions for that point in time in the presentation. We do have some local and elected officials here today. I know that Senator Dan Zumbaugh is here in the audience. And I also believe, I was told we have a couple county supervisors. If you could raise your hands. Okay, we've got 3 county supervisors with us this morning as well. Any other elected officials here today? Back there, okay. Thank you. You should have received a copy of the informational handout when you arrived today. You should have received a packet that looks like this. Anybody not receive this packet when I walked in today? If you did not receive it, please raise your hand. I do have IUB staff here that will bring one to you. So it looks like on this side of the room, got one here as well. If you keep your hands raised, we'll go ahead and get you those packets. I want everybody to have this packet. It's very good information, a lot of reference material that you'll want to have beyond today's meeting. We got one back there, we got one in the aisle, we got quite a few over on this side. Anybody else need a packet? All right, perfect, thank you. And I'll be referencing this packet and materials throughout the presentation here today. So we'll go ahead and get started. The IUB Utilities Board is conducting this informational meeting with the specific purpose of providing potentially affected landowners, which is you, with essential background information on the proposed project and the route, and to describe your legal rights before the pipeline company can start negotiations. You will also be provided with information on actions you may take in order to participate in this process. So it's approximately, well, we're a little later now, but we're after 12 o'clock p.m. Monday, August 22nd, 2022. We are in Manchester, Iowa. The purpose of this meeting is to provide information regarding Navigator Heartland Greenway LLCs, which I will refer to them as Navigator this morning, and their proposal to construct 24.98 miles of hazardous liquid pipeline in Delaware County as part of an overall 810-mile pipeline throughout the state of Iowa. The IUB previously held an informational meeting in Delaware County on December 6, 2022. However, the route has changed outside the original notice corridor, and this informational meeting today is required due to those changes. The IUB, under statutory direction, has established procedures which Navigator must follow to obtain a permit for construction, operation, and maintenance of a hazardous liquid pipeline. This meeting is the first step in the permit process as required by Chapter 479B. One of my responsibilities today is to verify that Navigator has met all statutory and administrative rule requirements. At the end of today's presentation, I will make a declaration as to whether or not Navigator has complied with Iowa law. Today's agenda. So on the screen you have the agenda. You also have a copy of the agenda in your packet. So for today's agenda, there should be a description of the Iowa Utilities Board. You will receive information about the Office of Consumer Advocate, a summary of the permit process and the legal rights of landowners, information about the project, which will be presented by Navigator, and there will be a question and answer session at the end. During the question and answer period, you may ask Navigator representatives about the project, and you may ask me about the IUB's procedures. This informational meeting is a prerequisite to the negotiation process. It is my intent to allow questions from landowners first, and then take questions from the general public. In addition to the agenda, other items included in your handout are the IUB's informational meeting presentation, which provides you with information about the process and the procedures. There is a statement of property owners' rights, which I will refer to as the green sheet within your packet. It's an important document prepared by the Attorney General's office to inform you of your rights. There is information on how to file written comments, objections, or letters of support. Iowa Code for Chapter 479B, and this is Iowa's law regarding hazardous liquid pipelines. There will be information in there about property surveying. And then IUB rules at Chapter 9 that regarding restoration of agricultural lands. And then there is, or are, frequently asked questions about eminent domain. One thing I would point out from those comments for this meeting today, this is the first step in the process, is having a public information meeting. Anything that you say here today is not part of the official record. If you want your comments to be part of the official record, you need to file those in an electronic filing system that is housed on the IUB website. So again, through these meetings, and I've done a lot of these, there are people sometimes that feel that the comments here today will be used at the actual hearing. That is not the case. You need to file those comments into the electronic filing system. So what is the Iowa Utilities Board? The Iowa Utilities Board is an independent quasi-judicial regulatory body. It's composed of 3 members. The members serve staggered 6-year terms. No more than 2 are from the same political party. We are appointed by the governor and we are confirmed by the Senate. The current board members are Jerry Huser, who is the chair, Richard Lozier, and myself, Josh Burns. While the IUB primarily regulates the rates, safety, and service of utility companies, we are also charged with issuing permits for various types of infrastructure projects such as this one. The IUB's decisions are based on evidence presented to the IUB and on the law. IUB actions may also be reviewed by the courts. The Office of Consumer Advocate. Today we have with us Ms. Jennifer Easler. Ms. Easler is the consumer advocate for the state of Iowa. And at this time, I would ask her if she has any comments that she would like to make.
Thank you, Board Member Burns. I am appointed by Tom Miller and subject to confirmation by the Senate. My office, the Office of Consumer Advocate, represents consumers and the public interest generally in cases that come before the Iowa Utilities Board. We don't represent individual landowners, but we carefully consider the comments that you provide in these meetings, and I would just reiterate Board Member Burns' recommendation. If you want your comments considered by the board and the record in this case, it's important to file them electronically with the board on their electronic filing system. And if you have any questions about that, there are plenty of people afterward who can help with that. In your packet of information, there's a card with my contact information. We're relatively early in our review of this case. We haven't taken a position on it, but we have a staff of attorneys and technical experts who will review the application, and we have the opportunity to file testimony. And we will fully participate in the case that comes before the Iowa Utilities Board on this. We will be looking at the route, safety considerations, and whether the pipeline serves the public convenience and necessity. And in that regard, we are very interested in your views on that, and I thank you for coming out today.
Thank you, Ms. Easler. And just to reiterate, the electronic filing system, I know there may be some of you sitting here today that say I'm not good at technology, and you're telling me that I have to file things electronically on a website. We do have a customer service department at the Iowa Utilities Board, and there's information in your packet. They will absolutely walk you through that process. We try to make this as convenient and easy as possible for people to file those comments. And they've done a lot of work thus point helping people get that accomplished. All right, so we will go through the permit process at this time. So the hazardous liquid pipeline permit process and law, including the legal rights of landowners. A permit is a grant of authority by the Iowa Utilities Board to build, operate, and maintain a pipeline. Information on the permit process and law, as well as your legal rights, is included in that informational packet. The first step in the permit process is for the company to request informational meetings such as this one be scheduled in the counties where the pipeline is proposed to be located. A requirement for notification of the informational meeting is that Navigator identify the corridor within which the company wishes to place the pipeline. Notice is provided to all property owners within that corridor. Therefore, in many cases, a landowner may have received notice to attend today's informational meeting because their property is within the corridor, but it may not end up being part of the proposed route. As you may be aware, there was an earlier informational meeting held in Delaware County on December 6th of 2022. The reason that Navigator requested this additional information is that Navigator is seeking to place its proposed pipeline outside of the original notification corridor, which was provided during the first informational meeting. Today's meeting ensures the landowners who are now within Navigator's new corridor are afforded the same opportunities as those who were within Navigator's original notification corridor. That being said, additional informational meetings have been scheduled for 12 counties. 3 of those counties were not part of Navigator's initial informational meetings, and the remaining 9 counties, Navigator has changed the notification corridor. There will also be a virtual meeting that will be held at 6 o'clock p.m. September 21st of 2022. So if you know of someone who is unable to attend the meeting today, please inform them about the virtual option and the informational meeting that we will do virtually. That information is also on the Iowa Utility Board's website. So again, if somebody was not here today or unable to attend, they can do the virtual option. And again, that date is September 21st, 2022, and that is at 6 o'clock p.m. The company cannot file its petition for permit with the IUB until at least 30 days after the informational meetings have been held. After the petition is filed, the IUB will set a scheduling conference that establishes a schedule for intervention by parties, which could be landowners, and for testimony, and for a hearing date. Notice of the hearing will be published for 2 consecutive weeks in each of the affected counties. At the hearing, the IUB will hear evidence in favor of or opposing the project. Any affected landowner may file comments either for or against the proposed pipeline as part of the IUB's review process. Phone calls or verbal communication is not considered as part of the official record. Only written comments will be considered. If you do file comments, please reference the docket number identified in your informational handout. And that docket number is HLP-2021-0003. I know it seems a little odd, but that is the identification system that we use to separate dockets and identify them. This helps us to know what project you're referring to. This docket number can also be found on the front page of your informational handout. Comments may be filed at any time within that docket number. Information on how to file comments is in the yellow sheet of your informational handout that you received today. A company is allowed to conduct a survey of property in order to determine the direction and depth of a proposed hazardous liquid pipeline. And this is pursuant to Iowa Code Section 479B.15. The company cannot contact landowners for survey permission until the conclusion of this informational meeting today. If voluntary survey permission is not granted, the company may conduct the survey after sending 10-day notice via restricted certified mail. The 10-day notice must include a 10 to 30-day date range as to when the survey will occur. If contact information is provided to the company will provide 24 to 72-hour notice of when surveying is to occur. Again, information about surveying is one of the sheets that is included in that informational packet today. Easement agreements or right-of-way. An easement agreement is a legal agreement that allows one person to use another person's property in certain specified ways. An easement provides rights to a company to locate its property on someone else's private property. It does not transfer ownership of that property. Landowners may contact an attorney. They may receive assistance from family members or friends during the negotiation of easement terms. Landowners may negotiate the use of their land or specify their desire for placement of facilities on their land as they negotiate. Landowners have the right to ask for the pipeline to be moved to a different location. An easement may be either voluntarily granted or obtained through the use of eminent domain. After this informational meeting, the Hazardous Liquid Pipeline Company, or Navigator, will have parcel-specific maps available for you to look at detailing the proposed hazardous liquid pipeline location on your potentially impacted tracts. What is eminent domain, or often referred to as condemnation? The right of eminent domain may only be granted by the IUB after a public hearing. Notice of the IUB hearing will be sent by the company through certified mail to landowners and parties in possession of property for which eminent domain is requested. If the IUB grants eminent domain, the company may obtain easement rights after a compensation proceeding. The County Compensation Commission under Iowa Code 6B determines just compensation for property rights taken by eminent domain. So this amount is not determined by the Iowa Utilities Board, but rather by the County Compensation Commission. Frequently asked questions about eminent domain are also included in your packet today. Statement of property owner's rights. Included in your informational handout is a green sheet that has a statement of property owner's rights put together by the Iowa Attorney General's Office. There are 12 property rights included in Chapter 34 of the Attorney General's Administrative Rules. These property rights apply to owners of record who may have property acquired by condemnation and come from Iowa Code Chapter 6A, 6B, and 316. If you have an ink pen with you today, please circle the following numbers, which are your rights, on the green sheet. Those numbers are 1, 5, 6, and 10. Again, on that green sheet, if you just circle the numbers 1, 5, 6, and 10. If an easement on a property is condemned, number 1 would apply, and rights 5, 6, and 10 could apply. These rights address procedures in condemnation taken by the court-appointed Compensation Commission in determining the amount to be paid to the landowner. Please review and read this sheet, as it's very important because it explains your legal rights. Ag land restoration and the county inspector. The IUB has adopted rules regarding the restoration of agricultural land during and after pipeline construction, and that is located in 199 Iowa Administrative Code, Chapter 9. A copy of Chapter 9 is included in the informational handout. The company will be required to submit a land restoration plan when it files its petition. The plan must comply with the requirements in Chapter 9. Landowners will be able to view the plan in the IUB's filing system and file comments regarding that plan. As part of its decision of the case, the IUB may approve or require modifications to the land restoration plan. The IUB may impose additional land restoration requirements based on specific details of the project. Landowners can negotiate their own restoration agreements with the company, but the terms must be consistent with the IUB rules, and you must get those terms in writing. Landowners' comments regarding land restoration may be filed using the IUB's comment form. The County Board of Supervisors will appoint a county inspector to inspect the construction of the pipeline for compliance with the approved restoration plan or with any negotiated restoration agreements. And I know that we have 3 of our county supervisors here today. I did not do this public information meeting back in December. I am unaware on whether or not you have acquired that individual yet for the land restoration.
No.
Okay, so that individual has not been acquired at this time. Some counties do have their person and others do not, and that is completely fine at this point in time. Ag land restoration, the company is required to provide the name of the county inspector to all of the affected landowners prior to commencement of construction. The county inspector may temporarily halt any construction if the company is not in compliance with the land restoration plan. If the company continues to violate the land restoration plan, the County Board of Supervisors may file a petition with the IUB for corrective action and civil penalties. Damages. The company is required to pay for actual property damage caused by construction or maintenance of this proposed hazardous liquid pipeline. Damages are considered different and separate from the easement payments. The company is required to designate a person to receive inquiries or damage claims from the landowners. Damage claims are received and decided by a county compensation commission after the County Board of Supervisors has declared construction to be complete. The company may include a provision in the easement agreement addressing damage settlement procedures. Safety inspections. Hazardous liquid pipelines are inspected by the Federal Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. They're also referred to as PHMSA. And you can get more information about PHMSA and its inspection procedures, and you can visit their website at phmsa.dot.gov. Now, before I turn the microphone over to Navigator staff, I will explain what will take place next. While Navigator makes its presentation, I will follow the IUB's checklist to determine whether the presentation made by the petitioner Navigator has provided you, the landowner, or the interested party, with the information that you would require to make an informed decision about this project. The checklist I am using is based upon both Iowa statute and IUB rules governing hazardous liquid pipelines in Iowa. If there are unanswered questions or areas where I believe additional information is required, I will require Navigator to answer those questions. If Navigator is unable to answer the questions here today, I will require the company to file the information in the electronic filing system under the docket that I previously identified as HLP-2021-0003. When I have determined that the petitioner Navigator has answered our questions, we will take questions from landowners and tenants first, and then from all others in attendance. So I know that I'm not going to know today who the landowners are versus other outside parties. The purpose of the public information meeting is we want the landowners to have the first priority, to have questions, and to get those answers today. That's not saying that outside parties can't answer questions today, but we truly want the people that are here, that are the landowners, to have that first right this afternoon. When I have determined that the petitioner Navigator has answered our questions through the audience. So at this time, I will introduce Navigator and allow them to make the presentation. And again, I would just ask that you hold your questions about the project until after the completion of their presentation. Thank you.
I want to start by thanking everybody for coming out tonight. It's not night yet, this afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Burns Thompson. I'm here on behalf of Navigator. Like Board Member Burns, I also share a little bit of background in this area. My family farms actually just south of Alburnett. So I grew up playing against West Delaware and schools like that, softball and things like that as a kid. So it's very good to be back in your home. We do have quite a bit to cover today. I will caveat the fact that you heard Commissioner Burns mention the docket number. All of these slides are already filed with the Utilities Board under that docket, so you can find them there. We have also placed them on our website, so if you go to heartlandgreenway.com, underneath the Landowners tab, under Iowa, you can find all of these slides as well if you want to reference them at a later date. The other thing I'll note, this is a large room. There are some diagrams on here that are a little bit difficult to read, especially for those sitting in the back. We've tried to blow up most of those maps or diagrams on some larger posters kind of in the back. So before you leave today, I would encourage you to take a closer look at those if you can't see them on the slides. I've been very honored and privileged to be able to spend my entire career in agriculture in one shape or form. And I know that comes with a necessity of really matching faces with names. It's important to know kind of who it is that you're doing business with. So we thought it was really important to start this presentation by introducing you to some of the senior leaders of who is the Navigator team. We do have a couple of those individuals here that are with me today. So to my left is Monica with our permitting team, Chris Brown with our engineering, and then Jordan Jones on the side there with our commercial team. Additionally, Ann is our head of right-of-way, as well as a number of our right-of-way agents in the back. We encourage you to visit with them again after this meeting is concluded. The other thing I'll highlight before we get into the project itself is the level of expertise that these folks bring forward. So decades upon decades of experience in midstream, from a design, operations, construction, and everything in between components. So these folks have been able to do this type of work, do it successfully and safely. And we think that that type of expertise is really important, not only in here now, but also transferable to the project that we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, the Heartland Greenway, kind of the meats and potatoes of it as well. This is a high-level overview of what that project footprint looks like, of the carbon capture and storage or carbon capture system that we're proposing. It is approximately 1,300 miles in total across 5 states here across the Corn Belt, about 800 of those miles being here in the state of Iowa. What that looks to do, at least in the phase 1 here, is to connect approximately, 21, processors, that largely being ethanol producers. So across that line, you can see orange or yellow dots. Each of those indicates either an ethanol plant or a fertilizer plant. 8 of those being Valero ethanol plants, another 8 of those Poet ethanol plants, 3 of them being Big River ethanol plants, 1 over in Nebraska, Siouxland ethanol, and then down in the southeast corner of the state, we have OCI, or the Iowa Fertilizer Company, down in Weaver. Additionally, the financing structure, we are financed entirely through private equity, through a partnership with BlackRock. We fall within one of their infrastructure funds. I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the commercial model here in the slides to come. But before we get too deep into the project, I think we keep it high level and talk about what is carbon capture to begin with. We do understand that this is relatively new for many of us here in kind of the Corn Belt, but it's not new technology. This type of application has been utilized in a variety of industries and a variety of sectors really around the world for decades. There are, in fact, ethanol plants here in the Midwest that are beginning to do this type of technology on site, so capturing their CO2 and then either sequestering it or utilizing it into, or I should say transporting it into the utilization marketplaces. Again, I'll say I speak in a lot of analogies, so this is one of the first ones I'll mention here. If you think back to middle school science, when we all learned about that 3 different states of matter, right? Gas, liquid, and solid. That actually is, we have all of that throughout the footprint of carbon capture. So on site, so at that local ethanol plant or at that fertilizer facility, we're helping install capture equipment. And I apologize, it's kind of edgy. What that capture equipment does is basically capture that gas that's right now coming off of those fermenters, or being vented largely. That gas is then dehydrated and then also pressurized so that it changes from a gas into a liquid. It'll maintain that liquid status as it moves through that network of pipeline infrastructure that we're developing. You'll see that towards the end of that line, they're kind of a fork in the road. Our processors, they're a part of our shippers, I should say, as part of our line, those ethanol plants or fertilizer facilities, have expressed optionality. They want to be able to not only have access to geological sequestration, but potentially also access some of the utilization markets. Those largely being food and beverage, think bubbly beverages that we all enjoy, livestock processing, dry ice production, some water treatment as well. They want access to that as well as potentially for geological storage. So we are building out not only well sites in central Illinois, where we'll be injecting that CO2 well over a mile below ground into a porous layer of that geology, where over time that liquefied CO2 begins to mineralize and actually become part of the rock. And another of my analogies here, for those of us that grew up on hard water, every once in a while that aerator in your sink in the kitchen or the bathroom would kind of clog up or lime up. Kind of the same here, right? That didn't happen overnight. That took weeks or months to happen. Same can be said here. That mineralization process begins immediately, but it takes time for that to form. And thus, obviously, completing that cycle of 3 states of matter. So what does the geological footprint look like? So this is focused specifically on the sequestration side. We mentioned before, our shippers also want access to utilization markets, so we'll have terminals at which they can ship into those. But from the sequestration site, so in central Illinois, we'll be building out injection wells in this area, which are effectively, like I said, injecting that well over a mile below ground. The region in central Illinois, what kind of makes it special is that not only that it's home to this type of activity right now, those folks that have traveled over to Decatur actually and been on the Farm Progress Showgrounds, you're actually on top of an operating CCS project the entirety of that time. ADM has been capturing and sequestering the CO2 off of their Decatur ethanol plant for the better part of 7 or 8 years now, I believe. So much like the pipeline footprint, those injection wells have very little to no impact on above ground usage, so the landowners in those areas will continue to be able to farm the ground, much like they always have. In terms of oversight on this, each of these injection wells necessitate a Class 6 deep injection well permit from the United States EPA. The other thing I'll note, again, this is one of those first charts that's probably hard to read, especially for folks in the back, but there's a number of vertical lines you can see associated with the injection wells, or with the wells, I should say. One of those being for injection of the CO2 itself. There are a number of other wells that are also installed to monitor the CO2, so effectively ensuring that once that CO2 is underground, it's not having the opportunity to move around or percolate, back up out of the ground. Again, this is one that we've got blown up in the back of the room in a much larger fashion. I would encourage you to take a closer look. So we talked a little bit about what, where, and kind of how this all works, but I think it's also important we talk about why. Our partner facilities have some of the purest quality CO2. When you think about that biogenic CO2 that's coming off of their fermenters, it's about 95% pure CO2 on site. Couple that with the fact, the purity fact, so the quality components, also with the quantity. By the nature of just fermentation, you have a lot of CO2 by the nature of what they're doing, which makes them really good partners for these types of projects. Additionally, we see CO2 also as a very valuable byproduct of ethanol production. Similar to how the industry has evolved such that DDGs and corn oil used to be a byproduct, and now it's a very valuable co-product. Much the same can be said here. We see that we're building out a rather dynamic piece of infrastructure that can allow for the development of this industry such that CO2 could be also then a critical feedstock for development down the road. So what CO2 can become, be that the next feedstock for new ways of biofuel, bioplastic, biopolymers, some of those exciting things that are coming out of the R&D laboratories all around the country. You necessarily need the supply chain to be able to support the next wave of innovation of things like that. And we think that this type of infrastructure can provide for that type of development as well. Another common question we get is, so how does this all financially work? Another one of my analogies here. So if you think about a bus system, right? You as the rider, you get on that bus system, you choose your point A and your point B. The bus system doesn't, or the bus itself doesn't take an ownership interest in you, right? They're just entrusted with your safe and efficient transportation from that point A to point B. And you as the rider get to choose what that is. Somewhat the same can be said here. We as the developer of that infrastructure are tasked with the development and construction of that infrastructure and then the safe and efficient transportation of the CO2 on behalf of those shippers. What that model then allows is those incentives associated with decarbonization to get to maintain with the facilities that are actually doing the decarbonization, those local ethanol plants and fertilizer facilities. I've outlined a couple of those on the slide here, specifically kind of the market drivers in that space. One of those absolutely being federal tax policy, which we can talk about in greater detail too. There's a federal 45Q tax credit that is available to plants like the ethanol facilities here in Delaware and across the country that provide a set rate for the amount of CO2 that they otherwise don't release, so permanently store or sequester. That is not a tax credit in perpetuity. That tax credit is for a set number of years, I believe 12 years, to help them cost share what is a very capital-intensive expenditure of equipment that they're putting on site as well as the development of this infrastructure. Another driver being low carbon fuel program markets. Those are very prevalent along the West Coast. But additionally, our neighbors to the north, Canada, also just adopted a carbon-based fuel program, which basically says that no 2 gallons of ethanol are created equal, right? If you have a reduced carbon score associated with that gallon, you are deserving of a premium, and thus the value of that gallon is based on that scoring. And so by having access to those marketplaces, it improves the value that's associated with that gallon of ethanol. And then the third leg of that being also participation in the voluntary carbon markets as well. So when you are reducing an emission that you otherwise were doing, you have the opportunity to sell that offset credit if they choose. Some of the same voluntary carbon markets that many of you that are maybe involved in farming on a day-to-day basis are beginning to navigate on your farms as well. Again, that being associated with your carbon, this associated with the plant's carbon emissions. Now, one of the other common questions we get is, okay, well, we understand the process, we understand the system, but why in the world then is a pipeline necessary? Well, if you think back to that slide prior, where we had all of those kind of geological layers, we don't have that type of geology to that size and scale, coinciding with where most of the ethanol producers have developed. And thus, in order to be able to benefit or take advantage of carbon capture and sequestration, you have to find a way to connect that ethanol plant with the areas around the United States that do have those layers of geology, and do it in the safest and most efficient manner possible. And the pipeline model really provides for that. Just a high-level overview of the project footprint here, specifically in Iowa. Again, 810 miles is what we've got identified across 33 counties. We are doing one of these informational meetings, or have completed in the majority of the counties. And as the commission noted, we are doing a number of other ones where we've adjusted that routing here recently. But what I'm guessing you're probably most curious about is probably that footprint here that we've got proposed and updated specifically in Delaware County. You'll note that many of you that are landowners should have received this map already in the mail from us. A couple things I'll highlight as part of what's on that map. There is a green line, solid green line in the middle, the center of that identified corridor. Right now we have about a half-mile wide corridor that we've identified for initial observation. From there, we'll go and begin to winnow that down into what we ultimately think would be the optimal placement of that pipe. Now, before we get into that, I think it's important to talk about what went into identifying that initial half-mile to begin with. The overall routing philosophy is to minimize the collective impact, and there's a number of things that go into that. Following existing right-of-ways, utilities, and easements as possible, avoiding population centers, additionally avoiding culturally or environmentally sensitive areas as well. That lends us to a wide swath that you've seen there. Now, following that is when we'll begin to do some of that survey work, as well as conversations with folks and communities and landowners to help us identify where within that half-mile makes sense for ultimately the 50 feet that's necessary for that easement for the pipe. Another thing I'll note then is we've blown up that in even larger form. I think many of you were taking the opportunity to look at some of those posters in the back corner of the room. We will also have land agents available following this meeting where we can provide you more particularity about parcel by parcel potential impacts. So what does this look like from a bigger picture in terms of both economics, and then we'll go from an environmental perspective here next. We have conducted an environmental impact, or an economic impact, study. We then also very recently updated that. In fact, I got the draft of it over the weekend, so I have some rough numbers to be able to mention specifically. But when you look at the size of the project footprint and the percentage of it that's in Iowa, a large part of that economic churn is anticipated to stay here in the state. We do anticipate that the property tax estimate that I've got here, specifically for Delaware County, looks to be about an annual boost of $743,000 a year, is what that taxable valuation would be that we would be adding back specifically into the county. Overall, the project is anticipated to be well over a $3 billion investment, so a very sizable investment overall in infrastructure, not just here in this state, but really across the Corn Belt broadly. The other thing I'd note, in addition to the economic partnerships that we've made in terms of ensuring that we're hiring local labor, high-quality skilled labor as part of that, so providing additional churn in that particular perspective. But when you think about what's part of the project economic sizing as well too is the sectors that are partnering with us are also critically important to the fabric of what is Iowa. We are an agricultural state, and vitality of the agricultural sector, be it our processors, all the way down to the farm gate level, is critically important. But with that also, you know that in any business, evolution is important. Constant improvement is important. The phones in each of our pockets look a lot different than the phones of 5 and 10 years ago. The trucks that we all drove here look a lot different than the first truck we bought, right? The same can be said for the ethanol industry. The plants that were built 15 and 20 years ago look a lot different than they do today. They've optimized, they've innovated, they've added new technologies as part of it. And carbon capture is just another step in that process of optimization and innovation to continue to stay relevant, current, and competitive in what is becoming a very carbon-centric economy. So in addition to economics, the environmental pieces are also incredibly important. I'll be also the first one to say that I think carbon is really hard to conceptualize, right? What does a ton of carbon look like? Does it fill my coffee cup? Does it fill your truck bed? Does it fill this room? It's hard to wrap our heads around. So we tried to put together, based on the carbon calculator that is available through the United States EPA, to put in some metrics in terms of frame of reference of what does 15 million metric tons look like in terms of an offset or an impact. You're looking at potentially the equivalent of 3.2 million cars or 18 million acres, right? Those are some big impacts. In addition to that, I think noting that this is not only making benchmarks from society perspectives, industry perspectives, but also helping these industries meet those environmental benchmarks that they set for themselves. So for example, the ethanol industry specifically has made a pretty public pledge to be net zero or potentially net negative carbon by 2050. A facility that adopts carbon capture technology has the potential to reduce the carbon score of that N-gallon ethanol by about 50%, and that's pretty significant. Now you note I didn't say 100%, right? We get them about halfway there. It's going to take a number of other innovations, be that additional quantification of farm-based carbon practices, right? So that value is coming all the way down to the farm gate as well, in addition to a number of other levels of optimization to truly get to that 100%. But this is significant progress. So timeline. Robust projects of this size and scale also necessitate very robust, broad timelines. You can see some benchmarks of roughly where we've been over the last months/couple of years, as well as what's led up to not only the meeting that we had last winter, but also the meeting that we're having today. We do anticipate filing the full permit application with the Utilities Board by late October, potentially early November, as well as all of the other permitting steps and process that are associated with this. So each state does permitting just a little bit differently. So we'll be working through these processes in all 5 of those states, as well as the necessary federal permits, as well as working with the local county on road crossings and road hauls and all of the things that the county level also has a level of perspective over too. With that culminating, we look to kick off construction in 2024, and then begin to kind of phase in operations throughout the very latter part of that year and into 2025. So the next handful of slides are going to get rather technical in terms of construction as well as the specific component parts of the project. But there is quite a bit that goes into planning of things like this long before we get before you in a meeting like we are today. I'd say we're pretty firmly in that second step of kind of preparation and permitting, this being the very first step of permitting in the state of Iowa. Additionally, we included the chart on the right side of that slide to showcase some of the steps associated with physical construction of pipeline infrastructure. I will note that while pictures are great, they can only say so much. This does only showcase specifically trenching or traditional pipeline construction. We will trench the line for a significant majority of the footprint, but we'll also use boring, horizontal directional drilling, and a number of other installation techniques, which Chris can talk through specifically if we've got questions on that. Additionally, I think this outlines some of the specific steps in relation to land restoration, as well as the role of that inspector, which you heard mentioned about before. Ultimately, with that inspection and restoration, process being very keen as part of the construction step as well. We do also have this one, we did originally have it blown up. It looks like we don't have that one today, but if you have questions specifically, we can cover that in more detail. So the steps associated with right-of-way. Many of you that are here today are probably landowners or interested parties that received a packet of information in the mail for us. Those are required to be at least 30 days in advance of this meeting. So many of this information you should have seen or may have seen before. This meeting then thus being the next step of that process. Following that, we can begin to do more of that outreach directly with landowners. You heard mentioned that the survey work that's part of that. Getting a letter in the mail, also likely a phone call from one of our land team agents to talk through kind of what those steps look like in relation to survey, as well as beginning the processes once we have the necessary intel, or information I should say, to guide us in terms of ultimately where that proposed route would be to begin the work towards negotiation of the easement itself. More specifically on survey, I think we call it a survey, but there are a number of layers that go into surveying. Monica can speak more specifically to it when we get into Q&A as well, but it's not a matter of just going out and looking for one particular thing. We have survey crews that go and look at constructability, so think physical lay of the land. Additionally, we need to do different environmental and biological surveys. Additionally, there's cultural components. We've also done a large level of outreach into the tribal community to ensure that they've been looped in on this process as well. So another layer of that survey work. All of that technical information also is what help guides again into that routing. Additionally, I'll say we are committed to working collaboratively through this process, and we fully acknowledge that this is a negotiation. So we absolutely want to reach a value that is fair and equitable, and that's reached through conversations. And so we ask and encourage you to give us the time of day to hear what we're bringing to market and what we're offering, and help guide us in that conversation about what is fair. So the easement itself, I'll specifically mention this is being built specifically for CO2, and the agreements or the language of that easement agreement will reflect that as well. We are seeking a non-exclusive easement, so those that aren't familiar with what that means, you basically does not preclude you from doing work above or below. For instance, if you want a tile, you can do that. If you want to have other utilities, wind or solar, those types of things that can happen. The only restrictions would be the development of above ground structures, buildings, homes, stuff like that, as well as deeply rooted trees, also things that can cover that canopy that would cover the line as well. We are looking specifically for a 50-foot easement. That's the minimum required by PHMSA, 25 on each side of the center of the pipe. Additionally, we'll need another 50 to 75 feet in areas for the necessary construction corridor, so ensuring that our crews have the space to be able to move equipment and things like that. That easement would revert immediately back to the landowner following the closure of construction, I should say. We are proposing an option structure, meaning that 20% of that easement in value being paid upon signing of the agreement, the remaining 80% available paid prior to construction. Now, one thing that's on this slide that for those of you that were here last winter will note that this has changed a little bit. We listened. We heard that not everybody wants a one-time lump sum payment. Some folks would prefer to have that spread out over time. So we went back to the drawing board to figure out how do we provide that. And we've built some models so you can choose to have a one-time lump sum. Maybe you've got your eyes on a new piece of machinery or a down payment on a neighboring farm. Some folks would rather have that spread out over time. So we have a 20-year payout with an escalator option as part of that as well, so that you have more optionality in that. Additionally, I'll note that Iowa law does have provisions specifically outlined in relation to cancellation of those agreements should you need them, and we've included that as part of the slides as well. So compensation. I'll be the first to note that there's a lot that goes into what is the value of land, and some of that being outside of just the dollars and cents. I'm a farm kid myself, and I know that there's more that goes into it than just CSR values and what the neighboring farm went for. We're trying to do an accounting for all of those quantifiable factors. So we've done a pretty robust market study. I fully realize that land has done a lot in the last 6 and 8 months. We're trying to account for that also in terms of those valuations. But we did do a robust market study looking at a number of those actually quantifiable factors to help guide and what ultimately we're bringing forward as part of that easement valuation. Additionally, noted that outside of the easement payment, there are a number of other compensation buckets, the secondary one of those necessarily being crop loss. There are crop losses associated with pipeline construction. This is also something that we heard time and time again through the last round of meetings, that our math was off. So we had outlined a 3-year schedule of which, or I should say calculation of those crop loss damages. We're told time and time again that that wasn't enough and it wasn't the right way to do it. So we went back and tried to figure out how do you do that math so it's actually more representative over a longer period of time and boosted that percentage to 250%. Again, I'll note that that 250% is paid out prior to construction, regardless of whether or not you even reach 250% of crop loss. The other side of that being that we are responsible for the impacts of the construction and operations of this line. So in the event that you were to exceed 250% of crop loss, we are also responsible for that. And we welcome those conversations on a one-on-one basis. Likely, if you are reaching 250% or beyond, there's probably something more at issue, a deeper rooted issue in relation to restoration that also needs to be repaired. So in terms of drain tile, probably one of the most expensive pieces of production farming outside of maybe buying the land to begin with. And we realize that that is a critical issue. That's why we've dedicated an entire slide to it. But part of this being working with you as a landowner, your tenant, potentially your tile contractor, to help locate not only the type of tile, but where that tile is at. We know that we will hit some tile. We know that there will be tile that needs to get fixed. We know that it's important that we provide flexibility so that you're comfortable with those repairs as well. So we wanted to additionally provide flexibility in terms of how that repair work can and should happen. So maybe you do tile yourself. You'd like to give us a bid on what it would take for you to do that fix. We can do it that way. Maybe you have the contractor that maybe laid the tile itself and you want them to do the work. You get a bid, send that to us, and we'll compensate for that. You can also have us do that work. Whatever your comfort level is, we want to make sure that it's not only the composition of the work, but also who is doing it is important as well. So we want to make sure that you're comfortable. Additionally, I failed to mention, we'll also bring out our own ag inspectors as part of that process. So in addition to the county inspectors, we want to make sure that we're having subject matter experts out in the field on a daily basis as well to ensure that that restoration work is being done top quality as well. Now there's a lot on this slide. I am not going to walk through every bullet point on here, but I do want to make sure that we highlight that this is an acknowledgement that this is absolutely your land, and treating it with the utmost respect is our absolute top priority. So what does that mean? That means repairing, replacing, and compensating where there are impacts from the project. Making sure that we're accounting for all of the different uses of land, be it row crop, be it pasture, be it all of the different component pieces that are on it. Areas that have center pivots, right? Are we incorporating that into the compensation model and such? Additionally, as I mentioned before, direct contracting with land restoration experts so that we have a little bit more purview and better scope over how that restoration work is taking place. Ultimately, with that goal of restoring your land to its most productive and profitable state. So some technical components on the pipe itself. Again, I mentioned before that it is specifically CO2. CO2 is the only thing that will run through these lines, the only. The design, construction, operations, and safety components largely are overseen, as you heard before, by PHMSA, which is within the Office of Pipeline Safety. Throughout the entirety of that project, we have a number of different thresholds and standards that they set. We're exceeding many of those, and I'll walk through those in, some of the slides to come. The CO2 in these lines is in a highly pressurized state, so it does need to maintain at least 1,200 psi to stay a liquid. We'll have a range of operating pressure, but we'll test the system far in excess of that max operating pressure long before the project goes into service. Size and kind of location of the pipe or depth of the pipe are also some of the more common questions we get. We'll have a range of diameters, so anywhere between about 6 to 20 inches across the entirety of the footprint. Chris can speak specifically to what we've got contemplated here in Delaware County, but I believe it would be very similar to what you're equivalent to seeing in maybe a tile main or some of the tile that you have running across your farms right now. Additionally, we have committed to at least a 5-foot burial depth, in many places much deeper. We want to be at least a foot below field tile and at least 2 feet below any other utilities or other infrastructure that's out there. Temperature and kind of some of the other component pieces. By moving it as a pressurized liquid, we're actually able to move it closer to ambient temperature, which means it'll effectively be whatever ground temperature is at that depth throughout the year. So you won't have large kind of cooling areas or areas of the field that should thaw out, very early in the spring because of it, because it should be, like I said, at ground temperature at those depths. Additionally, we'll have a number of mainline valves scattered throughout the system, very strategically placed as part of that, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail, but really to be able to control and isolate the product as it's moving through the line. Lastly on here, pressure, again, I mentioned is critically important to the system. We will have, I believe, about 3 booster stations across the entirety of that 1,300-mile footprint. We do anticipate 2 of those being located in the state of Iowa, but I don't believe any here in Delaware County. So we saved probably the most important piece of this for last, and so the next 3 slides or so are dedicated specifically to safety and different component pieces within our safety philosophy. The first of that being kind of what is within our scope in terms of a design and proactive measures that we can do. Safety is not a function of just one variable or one specific variable. It's a number of different component pieces that we can continue to work towards and knobs we can kind of turn to increase the safety factor associated with the line as well. I won't talk through every specific piece on here, but I'll try to highlight some of the high-level component pieces. We are doing plume dispersion modeling right now with 2 independent companies. What that helps guide us is ultimately look at each kind of segment of the line in a very hyper-local fashion and be able to determine what would a release of product look like at any one point in the line, and then thus where can we go in, like I said, and turn those knobs to be able to improve the safety factor or further minimize the size of a potential plume or dispersion. Some of those things being, where can we potentially bury the pipe deeper? Again, like I said, we're already exceeding the federal minimum of 36 inches by going at least 5 feet. Many places we'll go deeper. There may be places where we need to put in increased wall thicknesses as well. More or closer valve spacings. Again, things we can do from a contractual perspective up front or design perspective. And then additionally, you see outlined on here, we are going to put warning tape about 2 feet above the pipe everywhere where it's conventionally installed, so trenched. So in the event that there was excavation that happened, you would see or kind of hit that red warning tape long before you'd actually encounter our infrastructure. Post-construction, but before we go into operations, there are a number of things that we do have to do to kind of validate the integrity of the line as a whole. One of those being testing it at exceedingly excess pressures and holding that pressure for an extended period of time, I believe 8 hours, to ensure that you're showcasing the integrity of each of the wells in each segment of that pipe. Additionally, ensuring that we've gone through the trainings and outreach and kind of technical components with local first responders and EMS teams far before this system goes into service. So the next component related to safety is what are those safety components as we move into a phase of operations? Some of the key things that I'll highlight on here, we are looking to install fiber along with the pipe through, so we'll do as much of it as we can. There are places where we're doing some drills that it may not go, but where we're trenching it, and for the most part where we're boring, we should be able to lay that fiber right alongside the pipe as well. What that fiber can do is effectively not only listen for where there potentially could be a leak, but it also can hear where there may be encroachments from excavation or things that are really close to the pipe, and then effectively give us a very precise XY coordinate so that we can respond in a timely fashion before that becomes a threat to the infrastructure. Additionally, a couple other technology components we have on there. Mass balancing, so effectively ensuring that what's coming into the pipe is matching what's coming out of it. In addition, redundancy in communications as well as power systems. Backups on each of those so that we're having the ability to truly manage the infrastructure, be it the valves and each component pieces of the line, and you have fail-safes or backups for those. In addition to cathodic protection across the entirety of the line, as well as CO2 monitoring devices spread throughout the footprint too. In addition to all of those really cool technologically electronic kind of component pieces that we're putting onto it, there's also necessity of a human element. And so we will also have a pipeline operator or a control room that will be staffed 24/7, 365 days a year. That will provide that flags that there may be an abnormality in the system. Those individuals will also have full remote abilities to be able to close valves and effectively shut down the line in the event that that was necessary. In addition, there's a number of routine testings, inspections, and calibrations and things that are associated with being overseen by PHMSA, and we'll fall in line with those as well. In addition to having our own pipeline operators that are scattered throughout the project footprint that are monitoring, inspecting, and working on that line on a daily basis, and also responding to those 811 calls. And the last one here, kind of being the kind of component pieces, because safety is more than just the tools and the technology, right? It's also embracing that component piece with the communities and the rural areas that exist across that line as well, to ensure that those folks, especially your first responder teams and your mutual aid partners, right? In many rural areas, we depend on our neighbors. That they're well versed in what are the unique properties of CO2, and then also well versed in those response plans. Unlike natural gas, CO2 is not flammable, but it is also colorless and odorless. It is also heavier than air. It is mildly toxic based on both concentrations over specific exposure of time. However, though, we transport hazardous liquids on a daily basis in a very safe manner, and so this is something that absolutely can and does happen on a daily basis across our state. Additionally, I've mentioned time and time again, we do want to be good partners, and that means also good partners with these communities. Including them in the development of those response plans, throughout the creation of those plans, and then also ensuring those relationships on an ongoing basis through the semi-annual drills that we'll be doing. That's not only a commitment to ensuring that they know what to do, it's also ensuring that they have the tools and technologies to be able to do that. So sitting down and doing inventories of what is it from component equipment, tools and technologies that they may need, and then also having us supplement that, obviously with the cost being borne by us as Navigator. A couple other things I'll highlight before I wrap up is that we are also in the development of a unique kind of first of its kind system called Nav 911. What that would look like, or is intended to look like, is somewhat similar to kind of the Amber Alert system that we may be familiar with, such that it would ping your phone in the event that there was an emergency situation. Additionally, looking at kind of the other damage prevention component pieces, I mentioned the warning tape piece earlier. We'll also have pipeline markers, and we'll have teams out in the field, and also regularly participating in those 811 programs to ensure that there's public awareness, both from a landowner perspective, but also from communities that exist along the line. And the last thing I'll mention before I wrap up is an acknowledgement that there are absolutely risks associated with any project. We do believe that we are proactively mitigating many of those risks through some of the tools and technologies and approaches that we've outlined through this today. And with that, I will
All right, thank you. All right, at this point in time, we've reached that part of the public information meeting where we will now take questions. As a representative of the Iowa Utilities Board, myself, or I do have with me today also Ms. Gail Beach. She's part of our reg law staff. She's an attorney with the Iowa Utilities Board. You can come on up, ask your questions. And again, I know that we got a pretty large audience here today. We want everybody to get an opportunity to be heard. And again, would like to have, if you're a landowner or an affected property owner, would like to make sure that you do get your questions asked today, and would like to have those individuals kick this off and start the process. Not saying that we would not take questions from outside parties, but we really, really want to make sure that the individuals in Delaware County do have that opportunity today. So with that, please begin. Thank you.
Check. Everybody hear me? Okay. So first couple questions, really broad-based questions for you guys. I know there's going to be a lot of really, really good questions coming after me. I'm out of time. Moving forward, I know this is the first meeting you guys have with Iowa counties. Noon on a Monday isn't really fair for working class people, right? We got jobs to do. Okay? So first and foremost, that big slideshow that you just gave us with all that information, you should print that out and let everybody have a copy. For full and honest disclosure, because we know that anything in there could be removed or changed at the click of a mouse. So printing that out for the people, that's a small ask right there. So if you would consider that, that would be great. Second is for the IUB. I think that a little better effort, if this is as big of a decision as it is going to be for you folks, which we know it is, I think that a better effort could have been made to the community to reflect that. And see, for us, as we understand it, it was a presentation, but we didn't know that that you guys were going to be present and essentially facilitating that. With that said, if this is that big of a decision, it seems reasonable that an effort should be made to let things go on record from this setting. Not in an electronic effort. We know how those things can go. Things can get lost through the cracks there, okay? So that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
My name is Adam. I'm chairman of the Dubuque Constitutional Sheriffs. And I just want to say to all the landowners, get your property in a land patent, become king of your castle, don't depend on the government to protect you. The government said in the 1960s, oil will be gone in 10 years. We need millions to fix it. Then in the 1970s, the government said, there will be an ice age in 10 years. We need millions to fix it. In the 1980s, the government said acid rain will destroy all the crops in 10 years. We need billions to fix it. In the 1990s, the government said the ozone layer will be destroyed in 10 years. We need billions to fix it. In the 2000s, the government said glaciers will all melt in 10 years. We need billions to fix it. In the 2010s, the government said the coast will be gone. We need billions to fix it. In the 2020s, climate change is going to kill us all. We need a pipeline. There's not a lot of people here, I think, agree with anything that's going on. There's a great slide presentation. It's a great slide presentation. You almost sold me. But the sheriff can protect you. Get him on board. Help him keep these people off your land.
I agree with the great presentation, slideshow and everything, but I think people should be questioning the real safety of this thing, given the past with what happened in Mississippi, and nobody here mentioned anything about this. What caused it? What was the after effects of it? Because people are still feeling the effects of it. And I don't know what anybody considered in Delaware County, what happens with the frost line if it gets to the pipe, if it's that fragile as it was in Mississippi, what happens in the event that it does get that point? If we don't get snowfall, your frost line is going to that pipe. And so the effects of that, nobody's prepared for this, obviously. There's no way you could possibly be prepared for what's coming to your neighborhood, everybody out here. This is big time dangerous, and you guys are selling it as some kind of a, oh, it's okay. No, it's not. It's very deadly. That's all I'm saying.
So you did mention the incidents to Charleston, Mississippi. I'm going to have Chris mention a little bit more about that. We've read through the FEMSA report that came out recently. So.
Correct. We got the report in May, as did most everybody else on Satartia. Hello? So yes, PHMSA did issue their report on Satartia, Mississippi in May of this year. And from that, what they deduced from that, the lessons learned was it was a mudslide from prolonged rain events. It didn't have anything to do with the actual frost line. From that report, we've also obtained the 3 findings that they had in that presentation. One of which was that the operating company did not engage with the emergency management services there in Satartia, even to the point where Satartia wasn't even aware there was a pipeline adjacent to their city. Two, they didn't perform a geohazard analysis. And as what you indicated right there with the frost line or anything with the mudslide, that would be picked up in a geohazard analysis. And finally, they underestimated the potential of what would happen if there was a CO2 release. How would it migrate? How would it transfer? And from that, what we have been doing is putting that into our lessons learned. We're doing the plume studies that we talked about to understand what would happen in the event of a release. We are performing our geohazard analysis on our entire system, all 1,302 miles of that. And we're also engaging with all the county's emergency management system or services. We've already started those contacts. We're having a meeting coming back in 2023. We're having one-on-one discussions with them to identify any gaps we have and identify what we need to do to go forward and fill those.
To carry on with that, what about the vehicles? Because vehicles have to have air to run. As soon as this thing hits, it kills all vehicles. They will not run. So emergency situations, what are we doing for fire departments, ambulances, police departments, the sheriff's department? They can't respond to it if their damn vehicles won't run, and we won't talk about this. There's so many things you guys already been talking about that are very, very important here. And safety is amongst the top.
That was addressed in the PHMSA thing, the potential for if a vehicle were not to operate. Those discussions are taking place with the emergency management services teams. And as part of these discussions, if we identify there is a gap, if there is a need for a vehicle that would not necessarily rely on or have the ability to electric vehicle start, then we'd work to fill that gap. And again, those are what we're talking to with all the emergency management services now, and have to come back when we do put together our emergency management response plans. We will send those to them in advance of this meeting, ask them to comment on it, ask them to contribute to it, ask them to, are we missing things specifically for your county? They return that to us, and when we come back in the beginning of the next year, we have our discussions, we sit down, and we work it out.
I appreciate that. I would also like to say to the board here, you should definitely consider that all of this in your discussions, in writing or no writing, that should be in your discussions, because that is what you're elected to do.
The fact that it just seems a little bit odd that we can't even get the name of all the people within that corridor, the whole thing throughout Delaware County. The judge had a rule, with Summit to disclose all those names. Why do we have to go through a court to just get the names of the people that may be affected with it? Net zero emissions, is that something that even makes sense? We need CO2 for our crops. We need it for people. To phrase it that way, people think, yeah, we got to get rid of every bit of emissions in the world, then we're going to be safe. It's just got to be all dead at that point. So that phrase itself doesn't make any sense. If you saw corn that was 8 inches tall and you go out and cultivate it that day, the next morning it's going to be 6 inches taller. It's releasing that carbon. Those plants need that carbon. Animals, everything needs carbon, CO2. So, to get to that point seems ridiculous when you talk that way. The NOAA, it says in the last, 100 years, the temperature has only increased 1 degree Celsius. I think you're chasing, I'm trying to fix something that isn't even broke by getting all this carbon out here. I raise that for 2 issues. If it goes through a guy's farm, right down the middle of the stories of the valley of it, how do you guys compensate for a farm that was $20,000 an acre? Are you going to buy my farm for the same price if you got to live 500 feet from your front door, that pipe bomb going up? It doesn't seem fair for any landowner to have their land condemned in such nature. And the liability factor. What happens when you sell this pipeline 2 years down the road? Are those contracts, those liabilities going to be there for the next owner? And are they going to add 3 more pipelines? Is China going to own it? All things that, are you going to be liable at that point to our town if it smokes 10 kids at school? Things like that. Who's going to be liable? what we as landowners do when our own insurance people say, well, we're not sure who would be liable at that point. If they're not going to be, they said they're gonna wait until the claim is filed. That should make people sleep good at night, shouldn't it? So it's those types of things. I think you're trying to push this thing through so fast. How many tax subsidies will Navigator receive at the end of the year once this thing's in action? The only people that really stand to gain out of this, the pipeline company, the ethanol people are they're gonna all receive tax subsidies. And the Congress people that rolled on this, they're getting paid, that won't stand up and help us.
So to address some of your questions and comments, sir, regarding the line list, so we have filed that with the IUB at their request. Traditionally, nationwide, that is something that's filed as privileged and confidential. It's not necessarily our information to share on behalf of that route. That being said, whatever rulings come out and whatever decisions are made, we will comply with that. And regarding the land values decreasing after installation of a pipeline, on this project, just like every project, we build into a market study of the areas before that. So in Iowa alone, there's over 46,000 miles of pipeline, and the market studies don't reflect that the presence of a pipeline has a negative value on those parcels. Regarding that is honest, sir, and we've testified to that. The liability, so in the easement documents that you get will be indemnification. The liability is ours as the company minus gross negligence or intentional harm to that pipeline. So that is very much upfront and first and foremost for us to make sure that you recognize that that is not your liability for our asset. Oh, thank you, the ownership. So to transfer ownership of this asset would require IUB approval. There are state laws regarding, I'll say, foreign ownership, whether that's foreign to the state of Iowa or foreign to the United States of America. So that's not like a backdoor deal that could be done or anything we're interested in doing. So that there are regulations around who can own and operate these systems.
So just to be fair to everybody in this room, if you can use the microphone to come up and ask a question, I want everybody to hear the questions that are being asked. So if you've got a question, I would just ask that you come up, use the microphone, that way everybody in the room can hear what you have to say. A couple other things, just one, if you do want the presentation that Navigator did today, and one individual brought that up earlier, for them to give them a copy, that presentation you just saw today is on the electronic filing system. You can pull that up at any time, you can print that off. Nothing could have been changed because they have to submit that to us. And so that has all been filed with us. The other thing that I would mention, the reason that a public information meeting is not on record or not part of the hearing is because that's what state law says. If you want the Iowa Utilities Board to consider the comments and things that are made here today, there would require a law change that says you want the comments to be considered part of that hearing. So everything that's done as a public information meeting today is what state law guides and what it says to do. And if you want changes made to that, then that's where our elected officials come into play, and you would have a conversation with them about the changing of those laws to get it to what you're asking for here today.
I might just, if I can, there's two other things I think he addressed in here. I want to make sure that we're made of transparency, actually answering all the questions that you're bringing forward. You had said something about what prevents more pipelines to coming down the road. This is for one pipe, for one commodity. That will be reflected in both our permit as well as the language of that easement itself. We heard Monica mention also specifically the indemnification clause that's in there. We have tried to make that as crystal clear as possible, that we as the company are liable and that there are no surprises in terms of both from a liability perspective, but also from that infrastructure. It is one pipe and it is one commodity. There's not a point in time where you wake up one day and there's another pipe being laid, or that there's something different coming through that. That is specifically outlined in both that easement, which is that contract you as the landowner have with us as the company, and is also overseen by a permit. That does not change unless we were to go out and get completely new easements across the entirety of the entire footprint. In the event that someone were to buy this company, all of the stipulations that you have in that easement contract also follow with that, right? So the stipulations that you as a landowner have put in there, in addition to the parameters that are outlined in our permit, in the event that that would happen.
I have to get my kid to an orthodontist appointment, so I'm just going to ask my questions and leave. Please don't consider me to be rude. I am, but don't consider me to be rude because of that. Mr. Burns, I appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate the work all of you do. I don't envy you. I don't want to be in your position. You all look exhausted. But I think I may have some things questions others may want to know. By the way, the fellow that wanted to know people's names and addresses, my name is Chris Anderson. I live at 1722 120th Avenue. My phone number is 712-592-0800. So if you want to get a hold of me, that's how you do it. I will be filing my questions and comments with the Utilities Board. I'll have one of my children teach me how to do that. One of my first questions is, how is this a utilities project? Like I said, I got to go, so let me ask all my questions, then I'll escape. How does this fall under the term of utility? You said that it was funded through BlackRock. If you could explain to me what BlackRock is that a publicly traded company? Do we have legislators and other government officials who have the ability to buy stock in that company? Can I buy stock in that company? You mentioned you've been looking at what happens to, or I guess my question is, what happens to the carbon dioxide when it begins to percolate out of the ground? What is going on? Is it like Old Faithful, or is it seeping up? And then how do you address this? What danger does that pose to me and my family? Best I can tell by looking at that map, this sucker's going right through my living room. I'd like to invite you guys to come out and visit me and see our house, and our chickens, and our pigs, and the wetlands, and the ponds that are all going to be impacted by this. My main concern is safety. What federal and state regulations exist regarding pipelines of this nature? I don't care about the regulations that exist regarding natural gas or sewage or whatever. I want to know what regulations exist regarding CO2 pipelines. I'd like some more details regarding the results and impact of a plume dispersion. What does that look like? Well, I can figure out what it looks like. It's Old Faithful. But how do you handle that? What's going to happen to my kid when that happens less than a quarter of a mile away from my house? This is personal, obviously. What are the potential hazards and dangers to my family? How will you ensure that my family will not ever experience negative physical or medical issues as a result of this pipeline being within a quarter mile or less of my house? Not, you think it won't happen. I am that guaranteed, and I know you can't do that. So yes, I'm being rude and I'm being a jerk, but they're my kids. Will you guarantee that this unique odorant will be incorporated before CO2 transport begins? And what's it going to smell like? Because quite honestly, okay, so it smells like rotten eggs. I'm asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning. That ain't waking me up. It's not. I've just got some very strong safety concerns, and here's the jerk in me coming out. How many of you have a pipeline going a quarter mile away from your house? My oldest is going to college in 3 weeks. I'll have an empty room if you want to come stay. I will fix you farm-fresh eggs and bacon and chickens for every stinking meal. While that pipeline runs within a quarter mile of where you're sleeping. Thank you.
So I'll take the first question you asked of us first, and your question dealt with how is this considered a utility? So under the definition of hazardous liquid pipelines, carbon dioxide falls under that definition. And based on what the legislature tells us to do, and so again, the Iowa Utilities Board does not make up Iowa code. What we do is we operate within the confines of what the code tells us to do. And so our job is to regulate the industry, and so whatever the legislature is telling us, those are the parameters in which we fall in. So you heard me refer earlier to 479B, and so if you go to 479B and it talks about hazardous liquid pipelines, so to address that first question, that's how that falls underneath our purview, is underneath that 479B, which is that Iowa statute that provides us that guideline. So hopefully that helps.
And just to cover a couple of the other ones, the first one I want to know is there are no pipelines going under anyone's living room. I can assure you of that. As I said before, it's actually illegal to have structures over top of pipes, and so I can assure you we're not going under over anyone's homes. In relation to, I think I may have misstated, yeah, we'll jump back to that one. But the note I made about kind of percolating out of the ground, that does not happen. That's why we have those monitoring wells on site, so that you assure that that does not happen as part of the sequestration. So I wanted to make sure I clarified that. In terms of maybe let's start with the BlackRock one, Jordan, and then we'll go into the safety components.
Yes, sure. So BlackRock is a publicly traded company. They're an international asset manager. They are, so technically, yes, you absolutely could buy stock or equities within BlackRock. Their major holders, as being a public company, their major holders are listed online as part of being a publicly traded company. That is publicly available information. The BlackRock is also part of the S&P 500, so a lot of the holders that you will see were major index funds or major mutual funds or growth funds that are indexed to the S&P 500. If there is participation in any of a fund like that, anyone who holds those types of funds is indirectly an owner of BlackRock.
I had one here, Elizabeth, that said, what federal and state regulations? CO2 pipelines are 100% regulated by the Code of Federal Regulations 49, Part 195. And throughout that entire Part 195, it has specific requirements, not only from the design, construction, but also the operation and long-term maintenance of the CO2 pipeline system. So they are fully regulated by Part 195 on that. I believe he also asked about, let me read my notes here, the plume studies. So while we're doing these plume studies, we theoretically simulate that there's a release of CO2, and we're doing it from all the different diameters, 6-inch, 8-inch, 12, 16, and 20. And in this case, in this county here, it's an 8-inch pipeline, so I'll use that as an example on what I'm going to, explain to you how we put that and overlay that over our other layers of surveys that we do. So we get the results of our plume studies, 2 independent companies doing that, so that we're not biased on either direction there. And we also perform what we call a high consequence area analysis. And the high consequence area takes into account of population, a cluster of residences, an area of gathering, a church, nursing home, something of that nature, sensitive environmental areas, drinking water. So you have all these different layers. That constitutes your HCA. So we will take our plume study results, overlay that over the HCA, and if we find an area that has a higher area of risk, we work to mitigate that risk throughout the design of the pipeline system. Parts and ways to do that mitigation is, I think we mentioned it earlier, a heavier wall pipe, a stronger pipeline, an additional isolation valve, a different type of installation methodology. For example, a horizontal directional drill, which would have a depth of pipeline anywhere from 35 to 60 feet versus the 5 feet that we are currently having on a conventional layer. So, for the 8-inch diameter pipeline, all efforts were made for the original routing to maintain a buffer distance or a setback distance from a residence of 400 feet. From that, we also go from 400 to what we call our next range of 700 feet. And that's where we would take into account any type of adjustments to the design, whether it be a wall thickness change, again, additional valves or other areas, maybe even a potential relocation while we're doing these additional surveys in the field there. So for the 8-inch pipeline in this county, we range from 400 to 700. Again, just to reiterate, every effort was made 400-foot offset from a residence or a place of gathering on the initial routing. So.
Do you want to talk specifically the odorant, the process of the odorant conversation?
He asked about the odorant.
The odorant, yep.
Can we commit that? Not at this time. We cannot commit to whether or not we will be able to put an odorant in the system, and if it is going to smell like rotten eggs. We've actually looked at some that smell like garlic as opposed to rotten eggs, but we are still doing the preliminary investigation and the analysis on that. So 100% committal, we cannot do at that time. I can commit to you that we are looking at it.
I got a couple questions. First of all, on your electric vehicles you're going to have for this safety stuff, bogus, you're not going to have near enough. It takes more than one ambulance. You're going to take squad cars. You're not going to supply us with that if something would happen below. Number two, the Mississippi deal we're talking about, you guys brought up frost. They don't have frost like we do. Totally different. It doesn't, that's bogus also. And no-till, pasture ground. How many acres do you plan on going over with this of that? Because that ground already sequesters 0.3 metric tons per acre per year of carbon dioxide. You guys got that figured in the equation? You guys are going to open that ground up and release that carbon. Bogus again. And also, you're from Albernette?
Correct.
Family farm?
Correct.
They live there yet?
Correct.
Would you like this going next to your parents or whoever lives there house? Or anybody else? Would you?
We are not on the line, I apologize. So,
Would you like it if this line went right next to your family farm's house?
on our line, we would have infrastructure on our
Would you
farm.
put it there?
Footprint, yes.
You would be all right with it?
Correct.
Put it there.
Yeah, put it there.
You have 5 acres.
That's it.
Brad Kimberly. I just have a comment for the IUB Utilities Board. My comment is, I think it was a sad day when in December of 2009, the EPA under the Obama administration ruled CO2 a pollutant. It was a very sad day. And my question is for the Navigator pipeline people. Took it off of your pipeline frequently asked questions, and the question was, are there any long-term impacts to my land? And you made a very interesting comment in that section. The statement was made, we are committed to returning the...
I found it interesting when the gentleman asked you if you'd want it by your parents' house. You had a great opportunity to say, sure, it wouldn't be a risk that I would be afraid of. But I think your hesitation spoke a little more than your actual answer later. In regards to your land value study, I have no doubt that your survey showed that. It's awful difficult to make an accurate survey when you could not compare it to a time when you removed the pipeline back as it was. Land values continue to increase. I don't know how your survey would show that it's going to bring the same price as it does without, because that's not a possible thing to compare it to anymore. And I think the truth, because everyone that farms, you heard the response in the room, that's your answer as far as the land value. And I can't tell you what the number is. because we don't have anything to compare it, whether it's with or without a pipeline. I'm a proud livestock farmer here in Delaware County. I'm sure you will, but remember the effect on livestock, please, in your plume studies. I think you addressed the separation. Thank you. I had just a couple other. One other thing was, I do respect that it was privileged information, the names of landowners, although you had no problem getting those names to contact as far as carrying through for the pipeline. I would like to think names of those involved in Navigator, which I guess you've actually addressed from the Black Rock and so forth. But other than that, folks, just remember there's a process. Do submit your written comments. I also can understand why there's lots of comments thrown around. I understand why they say for written comments as record. It's in writing. Please submit those to the Utilities Board. Please submit comments for or against, and be informed. Be informed. We all have that right. Don't leave that on the table. So be informed. Written comments to the Utilities Board, as well as your representatives that are in charge of appointing these folks. We the people are in charge of the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I did want to readdress the land value thing in case I wasn't clear in what I was saying. What I meant about the market study and referencing the fact that there's 46,000 miles of pipeline in Iowa today, when we did that market study such that there were 2 farms, all other things equal, one had a pipeline and one did not, the market study does not reflect the difference in value of those farms. That's where I was going with that.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. You said something about getting on the internet. Not everybody belongs to the internet.
And to clarify that as well, you can mail those in as well to the Utilities Board, and we will file those on your behalf. So you can mail those in as well. My apologies, I should have mentioned that.
I had another question. If you have a leak, is that going to contaminate the wells?
Right, so your well screen is likely to be lower than where the pipeline is, and the commodity of CO2 or the nature of that is that it goes up into atmosphere. It would not experience pollution or contaminants such like a hydrocarbon pipeline might, where some of that would go down and leach into your well system. So the presence of a CO2 leak in proximity to a well would not have a negative impact.
And then one other question. I'd like to see everyone sell your property and buy a quarter mile from this pipeline and live in that house. So then you would know how all of us feel.
Brain injuries are very devastating, and the most common long-term effect of asphyxia, which CO2 pipeline accidents have been known to cause. What dollar value of a trust fund or escrow account is available to each individual that could be affected as a result of a pipeline accident, including people, pets, wildlife, and livestock?
There's no escrow account set up in the event of an emergency. Is that what you're asking? What the value of that fund is?
Yes.
Right, so that's handled with insurance and liability and all of those things. There's not a preset escrow fund set up for that.
Is it your insurance?
Yes, it is our insurance. We have the liability and
Do we have deductibles?
No, the private property along which the easements are on do not maintain any liability in the event of any situation.
What are the liability limits?
All of that will be detailed in those easements. I personally don't have that specifically all readily available. That will be in our application or our testimony and identified throughout the process. I can tell you that. I don't have that immediately here.
3 points
to address. First, the Iowa Utilities Board. I've been on your website today, and there are 24 pages of complaints and protests. Whose job is it to read those, and what decision tree do you use to weight those?
Yep, no, great question. So all that gets, I guess I'd use the word batched. And so that, we have staff that are actually connecting the comments that you're talking about, all 24 pages. And so they're connecting those comments and actually connecting it to the maps. And so we're taking that information so that we get a better snapshot of, on the maps, where those complaints are filed, who's filing those complaints. So yes, that information, it gets batched and it gets used and it gets processed.
So you are taking the complaints of the 600, or maybe there's 550 complaints on there, and you're matching them on the maps that you see back there, and then you're going to weight the complaints to see who's have value?
So all of that, I mean, we go, and that's why we go to hearing. And so the hearing, it's a due process in which all the information gets, you know, all that information is utilized to help the board come to a final decision.
Okay. My other question, I guess it's an attorney question about eminent domain. I thought that was when the government could come in and take property rights. And how is a private LLC allowed to do this?
That'll be on the FAQ of eminent domain, but the short of it is the Supreme Court of the United States has determined that private entities can be given the right of eminent domain if gone through a government process to determine it is necessary to a public use.
Okay, thank you.
Public convenience and necessity, excuse me.
I graduated from West Delaware in 1981 and left this county, went to medical school, and I've been reading some scientific articles about this. And I take issue with your statement about CO2 and its danger in water. CO2 into the water table, when CO2 hits water, it turns into carbonic acid. Carbonic acid dissolves heavy metals out of the dirt, out of rocks. It goes down to the water table. It's happened in Europe. I read their studies. Comment.
The nature of a release of CO2 within an aquifer or zone would be temporary and short-term and localized. So it's not, it would dissipate and naturalize into the rest of the environment and be remediated. So it's not something that would result in a long-term negative impact to the aquifers.
Where's your study at?
Again, I just ask, if you got a question, please use the microphone up here just so everybody hears it. We just want to keep things in an orderly process, so thank you.
I think part of their concern is if they have a private well, how do they know their water got contaminated and how they know it's safe when they go and take a drink? I think that's following up. Is that kind of where we're going? Okay.
So in the event of a release, we would have we would identify and delineate the impacted area. Should there be any wells in that area, we would absolutely sample them and maybe on an ongoing basis if there was concerns to that regard. We are responsible and committed to supplying any water resources that might have an effect to that. That is not an expected outcome in the event of release.
Okay, my name is Alexa IP. I'm with Families for Freedom here in Delaware County. And I have a comment I have several questions. One of them I'll start with talking about safety issues and how we do know that CO2 is an asphyxiant. I had a child, we had some labor complications. She was lost oxygen in the womb. By the time she was born, she was completely dead. So she suffered from asphyxia. They were able to revive her and transfer her to a hospital that could treat her. The hospital was only 45 minutes away from where we were. Doctors were on site and revived her right away. It still took almost 4 hours to get her on the special treatment to help with asphyxia patients. You only have 6 hours to start that process. And so if we have this happen anywhere up here, By the time EMS gets there, resuscitates them, stabilizes them for transport, tries to drive them to Iowa City, we're going to be outside that 6-hour window. And then your brain damage skyrockets. So that 6 hours is critical. And I know you can have all these theories and training, but if you don't have people there and ready and the equipment available, like at our hospital in Manchester and over in Dubuque and in Waterloo, to handle people who have suffered asphyxia, to do this special hypothermia therapy, this happened in the highest level NICU. How are we going to handle that? Especially that happens in mass. My next question, so relating to the ownership. So local companies, we have aerospace company in Cedar Rapids, we have Tyson Meats in Waterloo. The executive leadership and the upper management in those companies use the products. So Tyson Meats, they eat their meats. Down at Rockwell Collins Aerospace in Cedar Rapids and here in Manchester, they fly in the aircraft that their products go into. So I want to know how many people in your company live on the property where these pipelines go through. Because unless you have a vested interest in it, you aren't going to apply the same standards for quality and safety than if you are actually using your product. Third, just kind of talk about, I guess it's still related to safety. So the carbon capture system industry has years of catastrophic failure history. We have no reason to trust you guys. Sheep Mountain is an example where a carbon capture system failed and there were chunks of ice the size of grapefruit that were spewed into the air 200 feet. Another place in Mississippi, I think it was in 2014, they had a carbon capture system failure, and it took 37 days before they got that under control. And although nobody lost life because it was obviously in a very rural area, there were many wildlife that were hurt. And so when you hear us repeating safety, it's because you can do a quick Google search and you can find a lot of accidents out there related to carbon dioxide. And so, one last thing with farming, because we have manure containment systems, and there's a lot of concern over the safety of the gases with the manure containment systems. So, in the event of a carbon capture accident, and I'm not going to say if, I'm going to say when, because like I said, you guys have a history of this. Maybe not you personally, but the industry does. So when that leak happens and it interacts with a manure containment system and those two toxic gases mix, how does that affect the surrounding communities? And that's, I guess, my last question.
Sure, so let me tee up a couple of these things. We'll try to address all those, maybe not the exact order that you brought them up, but in terms of local impact, I couldn't agree more. I think that's in part why I started with my background, right? I have called this area home. I've called Iowa home my entire life. Our company specifically has made a renewed pledge to the Midwest. We've moved our headquarters actually to Omaha. Our CEO lives right outside of Omaha with his family. Jordan himself just moved up to the Omaha area. We have a number of our team members that are coming up to the area to call this home in addition to. So for many of us, we're building this, maybe not figuratively in our backyards, but across an area that we absolutely call home. So we are committed to this area for the long haul. In terms of industry failures or lessons learned, I think I can let Chris maybe elaborate into specifically kind of how we've taken industry lessons learned and apply them into proactive, because we can talk about projects of the past. There has been development and growth and evolution and learnings in every industry. The new technology that comes out gets a little bit better, and we can learn from other projects and where they've had success points, but also failures, as you've mentioned, and then they do things better in terms of our type of infrastructure.
As previously mentioned, as most recently as the Satarcha incident, we're taking that, we just got the report from that, and that was more recent than the example you gave just a minute ago. From everything we've learned from that incident, we are applying that in this design. The geohazard analysis, the extensive plume studies, the reaching out and engagement with the county emergency management services, not after you're in service, but well in advance. I mean, we're a year before we even potentially start construction, then we have another year of construction. We're 2 years in advance of even having a product in its line and having opening conversations with the county emergency management services teams. One thing I do want to mention, I was trying to write down what you said in there. As part of that Part 195 on the Code of Federal Regulations I mentioned earlier, that's what CO2 pipelines are regulated by. There is a stipulation in there that the minimum safety factor for these pipeline systems is a 0.72. And just to make that so everybody can understand, that means that pipeline can only operate at 72% of its maximum strength when you calculate the wall thickness and the yield strength of the pipe. I don't want to get too nerdy on it here, but 72% is what it can operate for that pressure. So as an operator and in accordance with Part 195, we had to perform extensive metallurgy analysis for ductile fracture propagation and other things of that nature. At the end of the day, the wall thickness and the yield combination of the pipeline that we are proposing to utilize here well exceeds, or the inverse of that, a lot lower allowable percentage of operating pressure, which is a higher factor of safety. So in this particular example, because we're in this county with the 8-inch pipeline, whereas that has a maximum operating pressure of 2,200 psi, the pipeline itself is capable of being operated at 2,800 psi, and that's on the lighter ballpark. So I guess the reason I'm telling you this is I want people to understand that it's not just, going through the motions on that stuff. We do have the responsibility, we do have the importance to adhere to the code and also go through that and make sure that we're operating as prudent operators as well.
And I want to add on to that regarding operations. So once it's built and constructed and it's operating, our operation maintenance program, one, requires us by PHMSA every 15 months, not more than less than 1 calendar year, to reevaluate what are your risks, how are you mitigating changes along that route going forward. And we're committed to going through that process along with the emergency management training and coordination biannually. So that's twice a year, nearly 3 times an exceedance of what PHMSA's expectations are around making sure that we are keeping safety at the highest priority during operations.
And your question, the last one about either like hog lagoons or other maybe digesters and such, I don't know that I have a specific answer for that. We have to dig in. I'd say that would be a unique component where we don't know what we don't know, and that's why conversations with landowners on a parcel-by-parcel basis are so incredibly important. Be it you've got a hog building there right now, or maybe you have planned to put one there in 2 or 3 years from now, right? We only know what is publicly available and what you're willing to share. And we can only be so flexible as what we're being told, right? So be it future component pieces that are on the land or the associated pieces like that, manure management as part of those livestock operations, we can flex as part of those things too. But again, we don't know what we don't know. So. Go ahead.
I don't know if I can reach up here. My question is not about safety, but I would like to say that considering the terrible accident that happened in Mississippi, we're not getting a report for 2 years and 4 months. It seems that it would have been the morally right thing to do to bring this process to a halt until you had an answer. So my comment is that in school we also learned about the periodic tables and that they were the building blocks of life. We never heard about hazardous carbon until you want to change it. It's a building block of life. Every one of us are carbon. So to make great symbiosis and everything works together the way it should, we need 1,600 to 2,000 parts per million of carbon. We are operating, based on scientific things that I've seen, we're operating at 400 parts per million. Now you want to sequester that and take it out of the air. We do not need less carbon. We need more carbon. So as farmland, my concern would be, what does this land look like with less carbon? Where are the crops? What's the bushels per acre that we're getting? who are we feeding? If we can't feed the world, we're starving the world. It's one or the other. That's it.
So I'll just elaborate a little bit on the carbon cycle. It's not necessarily that carbon itself is hazardous. It's in the way that it's being managed and transported. So as a pressurized liquid, it qualifies as a hazardous material. That's a legal clarification based on that. Carbon in and of itself is absolutely in the air today, you are right, and it's an important part
So
of
if it's
the
that
process.
bad.
Can I finish my answer?
No, because I don't get the courage to do this. If it's that bad, why are we doing it? I'm sorry, but I don't think Delaware County wants you here, let alone the state of Iowa.
I'd like to step back a little bit. First, thanks for being here. I know this isn't any fun for any of you. You're doing your job. I'd like to step back and maybe come back at like 10,000 feet and maybe direct this more to the Iowa Utilities Board. The assumptions for this company to do this and to make money are based on ethanol being a ongoing concern. And we've had some history with ethanol coming and going, coming and going. What happens in 5 years when drought or market changes? People are like, I'm not going to grow corn. I'm going to grow something else. God forbid we grow something to actually feed the world instead of putting shit in our damn. Anyway, so what if those assumptions change and in 12 years or before, these credits aren't there for whatever reason, you never know. This company becomes no longer a viable operation, and you need to think real hard, I think, before you give them a permit and then go to eminent domain for something that to me may not be here in 10 years. These pipelines are going to be here a long time. And I would just ask the Iowa Utility Board to think beyond 5, 10, 20 years even. That's all
I'll just tag on her Iowa Utility Board. Iowa Utility Board members are not elected. They're appointed by the governors, and they are confirmed by the Iowa Senate. And I'm asking the Iowa Utility Board that on this issue, you should really recuse yourself because you've been appointed by Governor Branstad and Governor Reynolds. And there's a conflict of interest in my mind. It's a little bit like you sitting on a federal, as a judge when your mom's in front of you for murder. It'll be really hard to say no, and we know that there are thousands probably of we don't want this in Iowa. And I'm going to segue into, so I would ask that you recuse yourselves, all three of you. And then I would go into, we are discussing a fallacy of an issue. Carbon dioxide is natural occurring, we need it, we've lived with it. This is a fascist move by Big Corp and the governments for our tax dollars, and we do not want it. Carbon dioxide is a great thing the Lord created, and we need it. We use it for dry ice, we use it for lasers, we use it for welding, we use it for, and the Lord has, plants use it so that we can eat. And this really just needs to stop. You need to understand, Iowans know CO2 is a good thing, and if you're, if you're pressurizing it, then it does become deadly when it leaks. So you're creating a problem. And the funders of this, with Navigator, associated with Larry Fink, I believe you said,
He is worth $9 trillion. He sits on the board of the World Economic Forum. And if you know Klaus Schwab, he is the guy that's telling us, you will own nothing and you will be happy. So there are some nefarious issues going on here. You're going after life itself, carbon and oxygen. You're going after life. This is a death knell, not only to the state of Iowa, to humans, because Iowans produce food for the world, as does South Dakota, Nebraska, and North Dakota, and all of you are here in all those states. So I would ask that you just say no and stop this process.
Stop.
Is the pipeline required to have insurance by the state? And what are the limits? Are there minimum limits they have to have, or they can just have $20,000? That's it.
So the minimum is $250, but we can direct that to be different amounts.
So it's
We've done that
$200,000 per occurrence?
for the surety bond, and we can change that. But there's a state minimum, but we do have the authority to change that.
250,000, how many zeros?
Is that correct? 250,000?
Correct.
That's a surety bond?
Correct.
So that's not per occurrence. So if they lose their bond, what happens?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by lose it.
Well, to have a surety bond, don't you have to maintain specific requirements?
Correct.
Okay, and what if they go bad on those requirements and their bond gets pulled, then what? You gonna pull the pipeline up? Because if you're a supervisor in this county or a sheriff and they pull your bond, you're out of the job.
Right, they can't operate if they don't have it.
So again, there's no insurance requirements, it's just a surety bond.
So they have their own insurance, but we have surety, and we can adjust that as needed, but based on statute, there's a floor to start with, and then we can take that higher.
Don't you think like gas, people that have convenience stores, do they have minimum requirements they have to have, like, you know, for environmental impact?
I couldn't tell you about gas stations. We
Do you
don't
know that answer? Yeah, but I think the state requires so much money they have to have.
That it wouldn't be underneath the utilities board, not in our agency.
Okay. Taking this project over years.
Okay, so I'll have Jordan talk a little bit specifically about the commercial model and kind of how the tax programs play into in the short term.
Sure. So largely our commercial model is based off of long-term commitments from our customer base that pay us a fee for our service, the transportation and sequestration service across the pipeline, pay for that in cash. What that ultimately allows is for our partner facilities to recognize the benefit of the tax credit and also the other market-based incentives that are out there, the LCFS markets that we discussed during the presentation, and also the voluntary carbon markets that are out there. In some very small instances, we have contracted with some folks to essentially kind of a portion of that tax credit, but that is a very, very small percentage of the model.
Would you?
So basically how that federal tax program works, and under the new provisions, now that was just very recently signed into law, and I'll take the chance to elaborate a little bit further on the history of this. This is not a new federal tax provision. The 45Q has been around, I believe, since about 2008 when it was initially signed into law by President Bush. That was expanded then, most recently under the Trump administration, where those tax credits, or that valuation per ton of carbon that was permanently stored or sequestered, as well as that was gone into utilization, the value of that was expanded under the Trump administration. Most recently under the Inflation Reduction Act, and most recent bill that came out of Congress and was signed into law by President Biden, those values were increased again. So what that provides then, again, for our shippers, those ethanol plants or fertilizer facilities, is $85 per ton of carbon that they are no longer releasing, that they are doing a permanent sequestration. Now they also have the opportunity, and we're building out the infrastructure so that they can have access also to utilization cases. You heard it mentioned a couple times, food and beverage, livestock processing, dry ice, a number of other sectors. There's a tax credit valuation for that as well, which I believe is around $60 a ton. Again, that is not a tax credit in perpetuity. That is 12 years to help those that are on that line, help cost share some of the cost. These are pretty intensive capital expenditures that these plants are making to install the component pieces on site.
So are you saying that the alcohol plants have to pay an additional premium if they don't go along with the pipeline?
No, they're opting to participate in projects, be it ours, be it others that are being brought to market.
Is there financial disincentives if they don't?
Right now, so just to put in, yes, I'm going to answer your question, I promise, but let me provide some context. There are 42 ethanol plants in the state of Iowa. I believe 36 of them have committed either to our project or one of the other carbon aggregating pieces of infrastructure, representing, I think, about 84% of the ethanol that comes out of the state. So yes, there is lower carbon intensity ethanol that's going to become on the marketplace. And if you're not competing in that, then yes, you're disincentivized.
So what's lower carbon intensity?
So currently, traditional corn ethanol has a CI or a carbon intensity score of about 60 or 70. In relation, if you look at petroleum gasoline, that has a carbon intensity score, a CI score of 100. When you adopt, so when an ethanol plant adopts carbon capture on site, they reduce that carbon score, how they do that math, by 30 points. So when I say almost half, right, you're reducing the carbon intensity of that. Each one of those points has a value associated with it because the markets are saying carbon is a qualifier of the value of the commodity you're bringing to market, which those of you that are involved in farming, that's not a new concept for us. We already have quantifiable characteristics that determine the value of the commodities that we're bringing to market, be it the bushel of grain or be it that gallon of ethanol, right? Every time you go across the scale, you get a ticket. And if you're not in that sweet spot on moisture, FM, or damage, right, it's generally docked because that's a quantifiable characteristic that determines the value of that commodity you're bringing to market. Carbon is much the same way, except we can't see it the way that you can see wet corn or dirty corn. Carbon is a quantifiable characteristic that the market is saying determines the value of that commodity. And you heard us talk about low carbon fuel markets. Those marketplaces are intact. They're saying there's value, monetary value associated with that. And so as a plant, to be competitive under that, because at the end of the day, ethanol is a commodity as well, to be competitive, you've got to work on how do you reduce those scores.
So basically what you're saying is ethanol is worth more money when the carbon is put into a pipeline and pumped in the ground than not.
Correct.
And I don't know who determines that. That just sounds like a boondoggle to me.
So those scores, those CI scores, are determined via a life cycle analysis. The Department of Energy has done that work to determine what is the math that goes into how do you determine the carbon intensity score. We don't always have the purview of exactly how you get to do that math, but we do have the ability to determine how we want to be competitive underneath of it.
All invented by the Green New Deal, I'm sure. And my last question is, are you using American-made pipe or using Chinese pipe to build a pipeline?
I'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to source.
Definitely not using Chinese pipe, no. We are actually engaging in local United States vendors for pipe questionnaires. We're also looking at foreign entities that are not China. But at this point right now, being that we're probably more or less 8 to 9 months before we commit to that, we haven't sold on that yet. But we are engaging on domestic.
I'm here representing a 97-year-old woman who has some of the best dirt in Iowa. You're proposing digging up about 4,500 lineal feet of it. What are the criminal penalties for resisting either the survey crew or the construction crew physically?
So under 479B15, there is the definition of survey and notice required, and at the end it says shall not be deemed a trespass. So the survey crews are not considered a trespass by law if they give you the proper notice. that can be enforced by an injunction. So that's in that packet that was given out.
Can you define proper notice?
Yes, it's defined by, the board has given out proper notice as well as the courts, the certified mail. They'll send out notice to you at minimum 10 days before survey crews come to your land.
Answer the question.
What was the question?
What is the penalty for resisting physically the survey or the construction crew?
I'm not a criminal attorney, but that would be based on the district court here. Criminal.
Somebody up here would have that answer being asked that question before.
Do we have a criminal attorney? No, sorry.
I'll speak to the fact that we do want to do this in a collaborative fashion. So noticing that process so that you are aware as a landowner of the steps associated with it so that you can be privy to all that's going into the survey process, the easement process, and the many steps associated with development of it.
You might clarify on your question how much they would pay criminally if they were there without, yes, that's the word. One couple things real quick. I find it interesting, and you mentioned corn FM, all those things we can see. You can weigh. They're quantitative by measurements, we all know, as opposed to carbon, which there's some right there, I guess. You know, so congratulations to your government. They figured out how to take more of your tax dollars to make available to somebody else and measure them in the same way, I guess, as the metaverse does. I don't know. We know you can measure in tons. However, I'm sorry, if, God forbid, this does go through, the only way to compensate properly is in perpetuity on a royalty that stays with this pipeline as long as it is there. Thank you.
I'm curious, oil pipelines were shut down because of the dangers that they can produce and things like that. What gives your rights? Are they liabilities and things better or worse than what they were? Why do you have the right to put in those pipelines when the oil pipelines were shut down?
Ma'am, I may need a little bit more background or context on specifically your question.
It's about the presidential permit, I think, already.
Go ahead.
That's what it sounds like. So it's just, we're subject to different permitting processes and regulations.
But the dangers of oil are less than these types of dangers. If something happens, if pipelines break, things like that. I mean, I feel like oil is less of a danger to us if a pipeline breaks versus your pipeline breaks. Your pipeline breaks, it's my life. Oil pipelines break, it's not my life. That's gone.
CO2 is such a danger to all of us, and the president is pushing all these electrical cars, and these cars won't run with this CO2 around. Why are we pushing this? Because we're going to have more electric cars, we're going to have less ethanol. The farmers work hard for everything they have. A lot of us farmers work 2 jobs just to pay for the farm. I just don't think we need to have this hassle.
Just to follow up on the comment about the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline was shut down at a presidential order. So if, with a new administration, they come in and say this pipeline is shut down, what happens with those annual payments to the landowners? And just going back, I want to go back further. Mr. Kimberly mentioned that EPA determined that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. I am a polluter. I've got carbon dioxide coming out of my body right now. So what is the public benefit? Get back to the basics. What's the public benefit to this pipeline?
follow the money. It was determined to be a pollutant. And then we got to the Green New Deal comes in. We've got Mr. Fink at BlackRock. My wife and I have personally divested of any BlackRock investments that we had. And you can see the agenda here. Does anyone from BlackRock sit on your board? I just don't see what the benefit is there. The other question I have is, what is the carbon capacity of the site that it's going into? Can you store 25 years worth of carbon in that area?
Sure, I'll start with the capacity piece and we can elaborate a little bit on the commercial piece in greater detail, Jordan. But the other unique thing about the Mount Simon, which is the geological formation there in central Illinois that we're looking, in addition to the fact that it's home to carbon capture in ethanol right now and has been so successfully for many years now, is that it also is a size and scale that it has capacity for decades upon decades. So that's not just me saying that, that's the work that's been done by the U.S. Department of Energy, the Illinois Geological Survey, collectively looking at what is the capacity of that region. We're talking billions of metrics of tons. So we have the capacity to be able to operate not only this project, but other projects that are looking at that region as well, and continue to do so for many decades. Again, I think Monica mentioned before that each injection well that's associated with it is permitted individually through the United States EPA. There are, at a very high scale, different caveats in terms of length of operations, so both of duration of time as well as a quantity associated with each of those well sites. And so we do intend that, or there's space there such that if you were to fill the capacity of a specific well site, you'd have the ability to permit out additional well sites in that area. There's a lot of ripe geology throughout central Illinois.
Yes, to answer your question from a BlackRock standpoint, given the nature of the relationship between BlackRock and Navigator, there's a representation of BlackRock.
There's been a lot of technical questions, a lot of technical answers. I have one that's going to take a little pressure off you guys. What's in it for you? Where's this profit come on? Are you guys willing to show us a profit and loss? 5-year profit, 10-year profit, 15-year profit? Is that up on your website somewhere? Can we find that?
Jordan, do you want to talk through a little bit of that?
Sure. So from the economic benefit or economic standpoint, infrastructure projects do generate a rate of return. Typical returns for an investment investor are about 8 to 12% over the life of the project.
And have you got that listed somewhere that can be seen? I mean, step down. I mean, surely you guys have done models of this or you wouldn't be out here. You guys have got something set up already to show what kind of profits you guys are going to be making. Not just an estimated 12%, but
we have
12% doesn't mean anything to me because I don't know what you're putting into it. I need to know, I want to know dollar amounts on what you're profiting.
Sure. So the presentation, the number is about $3 billion on the total capital.
Over what time period?
So over the life of the project, which we discussed from the 25 years of the permit that we're looking at and 30 years from the sequestration.
So what was that number again? I'm sorry.
25 years is the permit to what Monica.
The amount here?
$3 billion.
$3 billion. That's costing you how much to put in?
That is the capital investment.
And to run it? Okay, so that's your capital investment. That's not your profit.
That's correct. That's the capital investment.
So again, what's in it for you?
The 8 to 12% of that rate of return over that capital is the typical threshold for target rate of return. Now, from an
8 to 12% over 30 years.
Over
yearly.
Over the life of the project, total cash flows over the project, not on a yearly basis. That is not an annual.
That's not counting expenditures on what it's costing you.
That is counting expenditures because the cash flows take into account operating costs associated with on an annual basis. That's annual cash flow.
I was wondering where you're pulling the gas to. Who owns that?
So I think we talked about that before. Who owns the gas or who owns the pore space or who owns just to clarify that?
Who owns the farm you're pumping the gas into?
The landowners all throughout central Illinois we're working with.
How many is that?
It's about 30,000 acres.
I didn't ask that, who owns it?
It's owned by whomever that fits upon there. Just like if you took a corner of this county, all those landowners would own that. We are Christian County, Illinois. Is that what?
So you're gonna pay like revenue on 30,000 acres you're gonna pump this gas into?
Correct. Buy the pore space to use for the CO2.
And so does one person, is that like fall under mineral rights or anything?
It's very similar.
Does one person own all the mineral rights?
No, in Illinois, the pore space is owned by the surface owner, so you kind of own your property down the pore. Whatever your property boundaries are on the surface is what they are.
Again, how many landowners would you say that was gonna be?
I don't have that number.
You have to have that, because everybody where the pipeline's going.
So I will tell you that work is also happening simultaneously. So building out all of the well sites and the pore space necessary for it, we're doing outreach in those areas and working with landowners, the same that we're doing along here in terms of outreach with landowners on each segment of the pipeline as it relates to easements.
So you could possibly take their ground by eminent domain just to pump it into the ground?
No, there is not open domain processes as it relates to pore space.
So I guess my other question would be, are there any politicians or are there any people associated with BlackRock that are going to benefit from this pumping into?
Do a water line to my house.
Right.
You aren't a public utility, you're a private company.
So I think that the fact that it's the Iowa Utilities Board may cause confusion that this is a public utility. As it is a hazardous liquid pipeline regulated by the Iowa Utilities Board. But there's a distinction there. So there's
Right, but the Iowa Utilities Board is the one that grants the eminent domain for public.
Right, so then we have to meet the threshold. Yes, we bear the burden to demonstrate that we are of a public.
So I'm questioning what that public use is. Do you know?
Right, so a lot of that all comes forth in the application, the testimony, and in the hearing. But the fact that it brings economic, that there's a market for it and brings economic benefits to it and environmental benefits to it will be part of the case that was presented.
So to further elaborate on that, just to put a little bit more meat on the bones of that, so you think about what is public use or public access, public good, right? No, not everyone connects to a CO2 line the way that we might connect to a natural gas line or a water line. But you heard me talk about before that CO2 does have the ability to be a critical feedstock. It is used in a number of different manufacturing sectors. And so let me finish if I can. Being able to actually transport that in an efficient and in a safe fashion is also critically important. And it's not just like the pipelines of the past that were truly a point A to point B. This is dynamic, right? There's a number of on points via all these shippers that are part of this line, as well as a number of off ramps as well, right? The terminal assets, the sequestration. There is public access. We are operating, I think another thing we didn't talk about earlier, is we are operating as a common carrier. Again, us build out the infrastructure, others are the shippers. So if you have CO2 as part of your manufacturing that you happen to do, and you meet the quality specs to enter our line, then let's have a conversation. Or if you have a potential to want to utilize CO2 and one of the shippers on our line would like access, then let's have a conversation. So there is absolutely an opportunity for continued interconnects, continued connected points that build out that public use, public connection piece.
So these other utilizations that you talk about, have you already made plans for that? So your company is going to be involved in also making money off those utilizations, or is this for others? I mean, I don't really get that.
Sure, so we want to make sure that we're building out an infrastructure that allows our shippers to access those. Be that what exists right now, like I said, those marketplaces, or the new ones of the future, right?
So when you say you're storing it, you're not really going to store all of it.
So
you're going to use it and make more money.
Two different things. No, that's not correct. So when I say store, we say store because it's frankly sequestration is kind of a tough word. So when it goes underground, for the CO2 that our shippers want to ship to sequestration, and it goes underground a mile, it stays there. It does not come back up. So it cannot come back up. It would be void of both of our permits as well as all the tax policy that goes associated with that. However, that 1,300 miles is not just a one endpoint destination. As I said, we're building out terminals on that too. So should our plants that are part of the line want access to be able to sell to one of those other utilization markets that currently exist, they have the ability to do that because it is their CO2.
To add to what she's asking for, what you just said about being a mile underground. Now, the other lady asked about that, will it affect groundwater, our drinking water? She said, no, it does not. It comes up. Well, you just said it goes down and stays down. So who's lying?
I'm sorry if there was any, 'cause let me clarify. I was talking in regards to the pipeline buried 5 feet underground. The sequestration site is different. There is a very good scale back there that shows the cap rock available over the sequestration injection location that prevents the migration of the CO2 upward. What I was talking about is CO2 being released into the environment, the natural environment, the surface environment, shall you, 5 feet, 6 feet below ground. And that going into atmosphere and coming up. So I apologize if there was sequestration of pipeline there.
I have a question on safety. Where is your office headquarters at? Where are you guys based out of?
We're headquartered in Omaha.
Okay, everybody look at your map. Omaha's down in the far part of the state where there's no pipelines, no proposal. If you want us to prove that this is safe, put your headquarters in 400 feet of this pipeline and prove us that you trust that pipeline. You put your pipeline, you put the pipeline in your backyard. Everyone, you go to work with a pipeline in back.
I was a little skeptical of the project when I came, and then when you said that you were a subsidiary of BlackRock, it was even worse, and now you said it's probably 90% funded by BlackRock. That's really a big red flag. As the other guy, anybody wants to do their research, BlackRock has no good intentions for us in small town America. They're looking to scale down just for big corporations. That's part of this deal with all the ethanol plants. If they can cut their carbon or make it look good on paper, that helps their ESG score so they can get money. And they're taking all that away. It's nothing to benefit our area. I got a registered letter. I have very little ground. I got an acre of ground, and then you said it ain't coming under my house, but there's bond right there outside my back door, so I have nothing to gain and everything to lose. I'm going to get no credits. I'm probably going to be paying for it through my taxes for all these godforsaken tax credits that everybody's, greasing their hands with. So I hope the supervisors look at some of our people in town here and not corporations.
So once the CO2 gets in the pipeline, you would say you own it, is that, you own the CO2?
No, we're the shipper of it.
So if it gets put in a mile underground and somebody wants to grab it out of there for fracking, you could sell it for that. Companies are.
Again, when I said when it goes that mile underground, it is there permanently. There's no way to take it back up out of the ground. There are places around the world and around the United States where they do utilize CO2 as part of EOR and soil recovery. We're not an oil country. We're an ethanol country, right? Utilization that we're talking about that our shippers, the plants along this line, it's their CO2 to determine where they want to take it into. Those that are looking at potential utilization markets are probably some of them that are capturing it in part right now and selling into existing food and beverage, dry ice, livestock processing, those types of sectors.
I just want to be very clear, once it is in the saline aquifer, it cannot, there's no physical way for it to be extracted and used again. It's down there and that is it.
Did you say something earlier that it was?
When I talk about the value of this, we stand just as much on an environmental leg as we do on an economic leg, right? So while we may agree with it or disagree with it, there are economic valuations associated with carbon intensity on the products that we produce. So if someone, just in sheer capitalistic nature, if someone says that I value a product based on its carbon intensity, and as a processor, they want to compete under that type of marketplace, this type of technology is allowing them to be able to do that.
If that number already operating at 400 parts per million, that's way below where we could be, and I don't see the problem, so it's everybody's opinion.
Good afternoon. My name is Ann McDonough, and I'm a member of the Dubuque County Board of Supervisors. And I would just like to tell this group, you just went on a long spiel about, we asked you environmental benefit, and you gave us an economic answer. Just note that. The reality is that this is not green. They use green, and they say Heartland Green. The Iowa Sierra Club is opposed to this. 100% opposed. I'm here to ask y'all, Dubuque County, this pipeline Navigator's map goes to Dyersville and turns around. As far as I know, you have given zero safety information to Dubuque County Emergency Management Service. I brought it to their attention because citizens of Dyersville are contacting me, right? This impacts us. The folks in this room are terribly worried about safety. Do you know that fire, EMS here, are people sitting in this room? Who's going to respond to this? These are our kids. It's not just whether or not it crosses my property. It's whether or not it affects our communities. We already can't recruit enough people for fire EMS. All right? So please, when they say safety and they're working with people, I just don't believe it. I'm here because my citizens are telling me Dubuque County needs to get invested in this because you're impacting our neighbors. They're not notifying Dubuque County, but it impacts us tremendously. So, thank you.
Please note. So those discussions with EMS are happening initially in the areas of impact, but absolutely will be occurring with mutual aid counties. So this is, again, we are 2 years out from that happening, from the pipeline being in operation, and there's a long pathway of those discussions to be had.
Thank you. My question is how much money is the county going to get on taxes on your pipeline? Will that save the other people's taxes from going up, and will it offset some?
Sure, so good question. So the asset itself is centrally assessed by the state, and then that is remitted out based on a footprint perspective. And so you as an individual landowner should not have a property tax impact of that. We are assessed of that. The dollar figure that was estimated by our economist was about $743,000 a year, I believe, specifically here in Delaware County. We do have, it's outdated now, but we have a one-pager for each state on the economic benefits, or economic impacts, I should say, with those dollar figures. We'll get that updated since we just got those numbers on a county-by-county basis, so you can see specifically. Yes.
Did you guys say that these farmers farm over this pipeline?
Absolutely.
Okay, now, as far as land value goes, let's say, for instance, I've got, you coming past my house, at my farmhouse. I want to put a halted pine up. That's going to affect where I can put that, correct? And are you compensating the farmer for that?
It's a 50-foot strip over that easement where there would be no encroachment, meaning foundations or permanent physical structures.
But yet it's got to be 400 feet from the house.
No, that's part of when I was talking about the ongoing maintenance. So as we don't expect the communities to stay static in the development, right? So as development occurs and as that landscape changes, we are required by PHMSA regulation at least every 15 months to review that. We will be doing that on an every 6-month basis, a biannual basis, addressing and assessing. So sometimes that might mean if there's development that happens, we put in another isolation well, or we replace a section of pipeline with that heavier roll pipe, that safety and security. So when those distances can't be maintained, we implement design mitigation measures to increase that factor of safety when distance cannot be the primary factor.
So, and how close can you go to the pipeline, how confined?
Technically, it can go right over the top of it. Technically, there are mitigation measures put in place to ensure that it is still safe.
But I think you raise a good point about kind of future use, future development. I think we referenced it with the lady's question earlier about the manure facilities too. So where you have plans for future development, that's also something, there is no database of tile or plan tile. There is no database of things that don't exist yet. And so where you have plans for things, we encourage you to let our land agents know as we're having that outreach and those conversations. We do have flexibility in our routing, but again, we know what we know what we've been able to pull publicly, but there are a lot of things about land use, future land use that you as the landowner are the only ones that know about. And so again, to be a good operator means taking those things into account wherever we can, but you have to tell us. So.
Hi, Jeff Allen, Delaware County Supervisor. I want to clarify, you have not reached out to our emergency management director yet.
Not yet, correct.
Okay.
This was the very first step of the process. We held an informational meeting and then followed up with specific outreach to EMS.
I just want to certainly recommend that you keep Mandy in the loop from the start so she knows what's going on and she can report to us or you can report to us, but we need to make sure we keep updated. Okay.
To just do a little follow-up on the BlackRock situation, I'm super surprised and proud of how many people in this room actually know who BlackRock is and done their homework. Good on you. The question is, how much do you guys know about it as a board? How much do you guys really know about BlackRock and the evils that they are involved in? You really need to know that, as long as, and the supervisors as well, and including our county sheriff. Everybody needs to know this. If you don't know about BlackRock, believe me, you need to research BlackRock. It's directly affecting every one of us, and our grandchildren will not have a future with BlackRock in any picture, I guarantee you.
This question's for the utility board. I believe it was Capital Dispatch that released an article that Summit's been at this for over a year, and only 40% of the landowners have agreed to sell the easements. So that's 60% of the property owners do not want the pipeline going through their property. So with that kind of 40%, 60% against, how does that weigh into their decisions?
So, I mean, we don't know, until we have a hearing with them, we don't know what that number will be. It's very fluid, obviously, at this time. They're still going on through negotiations. There is nothing in code or statute that creates a threshold. So those are all the things that we will take in as evidence for the hearing.
I just want to say something about the welding part of it. We're highly trained to get this pipeline goes. We'll hit the test on every job. They x-ray every weld, and they do a hydro test at the end for the safety. That's how we come and do it. So that's just a little on the welding of it. Thank you.